Today, I want to open this conversation a little differently, listeners. Not with hype, not with the usual mindfulness matters tagline. Instead, with a reflection that's been echoing around my own brain lately, listeners. We talk a lot about managing stress, staying grounded, being more present, showing up and all. But what if mindfulness isn't the whole story? What if the way we push ourselves to stay calm is actually ignoring the one system that never lies? Guess what? The body. Especially for women who are operating inside a rhythm that's as old as humanity itself. A 28-day cycle that impacts energy, focus, resilience, and emotion, especially for women who are operating inside a rhythm that's as old as humanity itself. A 28-day cycle that impacts energy, focus, resilience, and emotional bandwidth far more than any breathing exercise ever could. So, today, listeners, on this episode of The Mindful Journey, we are exploring what happens when mindfulness meets physiology. What breaks, what heals, and what actually works in the real world when you are juggling leadership, ambition, and a nervous system that was never meant to operate like a machine. And as we move through the season, with the holidays reminding us to slow down, reconnect, and recalibrate, this is the perfect moment, listeners, to rethink how we approach well being. And I'm joined by someone who understands this intersection better than almost anyone. Rachel Korb, a somatic leadership coach, startup veteran, and also the creator of nervous system informed frameworks used across 36 plus countries. So let's dive in. No sugarcoating, no surface level wellness hacks, just the truth about why mindfulness alone isn't cutting it. So, Rachel, welcome to the show, and I'm really honored to have you here with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Sana. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Rachel, so let's first begin with trying to understand the scenario when mindfulness becomes a band-aid. So a lot of high achieving women practice mindfulness, journaling, breath work, meditation, but still many feel burnt out. So, from your perspective, where does mindfulness fall short when we ignore the body's monthly rhythm?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think I want to zoom out for a second and then we'll go back into why mindfulness fails. So I think there are two big contributors, right? One is more of the societal social piece that women are experiencing that lead to burnout, the invisible work we take on, especially that emotional work, the actual additional work that we take on, the different social programming that we have to abide by. And then we also look at the amount of trauma that women experience, which is estimated between 50 to 60% of women experience trauma. And this really impacts our nervous systems. And this is why mindfulness alone doesn't work from that lens. From the second lens is the physiology, right? What you talked about. And so when we look at women who are in reproductive age, so these women have two biological rhythms. We have our 24-hour circadian rhythm, right? The same rhythm that male or non-reproductive aged women also experience. And then we have the additional, the monthly, the infradian rhythm, which is normally talked about as our menstrual cycle, which is roughly a 28-day cycle. And so when we think about mindfulness is limited. It's very helpful, right? And when we think about mindfulness, we're talking more about something that's cognitive or mind focused. So breath work, I would say, falls under the bottom up or body first practices. But when we think more about journaling and gratitude and reframing, this is the cognition side. The thing is that this top down approach isn't enough because your menstrual cycle is creating a bottom up nervous system that changes. the need for body first interventions. So I won't go into all of that yet, but essentially what's happening is we've got a lot more signals. The body is sending 80% of the signals up to your brain via the afferent vagal fibers saying, hey, threat, threat, elevated heart rate, tense muscles, and only 20% is coming from the head moving down into the body. And so you see that it's really disproportionate in how much the body is speaking to the mind versus what the mind or the brain is speaking to the body.
Wow. I think this is something that, we sometimes tend to ignore so much because, I mean, many women think they're failing at mindfulness, but when really their nervous system is just in a totally different phase of the month. And I think this is also reframes this entire, self blame loop.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think when I work with my clients, the thing I see from most of them is they think there's something wrong with them. And when I explain the physiology behind what's happening, they're like, "Oh, so 1, I'm not alone, and
Mm.
2, my body's working okay." I'm like, "Your body's working exactly how it's supposed to. It's just you're forcing your rhythm into a rhythm that's not made for your physiology." And so how your nervous system has evolved is it's adapted to trying to force it into that normally that 24-hour cycle versus looking at how do I bring in both the 24-hour and that 28-day cycle.
Hmm.
Mm.
So that's that. I think that is very that is really eye opening. And Rachel, a bit of kind of not argument, but a bit of a nuanced point here. Like, there are people who say that, especially around leadership, that cycle shouldn't matter. It should be stable, predictable, or consistent. Regardless of the physiology or the hormones. So, what would you say to this?
I in my body, I felt an immediate response to that. Um, so as a woman having worked in senior leadership for almost 10 years, what I've
Mm.
come to find is when we look at this, one, where is that narrative coming from? Most of the time it's coming from majority. Most of the time that majority is male. And when we look at our workplaces and how they're designed for that 24-hour circadian rhythm, right? 9 to 5. When you look at how the chemicals change throughout the day in male physiology, it's supporting that 24-hour cycle. Whereas for women, we have more than that. And so I think a lot of it comes down to the system that we've created and the narrative that we have. And it's more about as women, what we can do, right? Like I always tell my clients, you can decide how you want to show up in this system. Like you can learn more around nervous system regulation for female physiology to help you navigate the system that we're in, or you can be a part of that change. Start bringing more awareness into your workplaces, into your leadership, into the teams that you work with. So they understand that it isn't 24 hours, the same amount of productivity every single day. Because from a nervous system lens, that is not feasible. And when we look at this, this expands even beyond of if women are not really honoring that 28-day cycle, this creates a whole slew of issues that link into our hormones and our imbalance. We're starting to see how it impacts fertility. It impacts digestion. It impacts our ability to make good decisions, to communicate effectively. All of these things are really important. And so what I would argue is, we can see why it exists. Or that's my belief behind it. Um, but when we actually start to shift and figure out how can we incorporate that 28-day cycle into it, I'm not saying we get rid of the 24-hour cycle. That's very important too. We need to have both. But when we can bring in that 28-day cycle, this is what allows for sustainable productivity, for better decision making, for improved communication, for collaboration and better team relationships within the team. And so that's kind of my response to it, but also where I can see the benefits if we start to think about it more inclusively, it could actually really shift our workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, I'm not going to jump on the gender biasness train here, but I mean, honestly, it's time that we normalize this without giggling about it, like we are in a middle school health class. That, oh my God, this is that, this is that. In fact,
Yeah.
even men have mood swings, quote unquote mood
Yeah.
swings that mentioned in the workplaces. Like, testosterone, it isn't some kind of a steady waterfall. It also fluctuates daily, even seasonally. So
Mhm.
I think the conversation and the awareness around it shouldn't be specifically from a gender point of view. Okay, I've got a female manager and she's having her bad hormonal day, as we typically kind of mention in workplaces.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also separating gender from sex, right? Gender is the social structure that we've created of if you're a woman, you must behave this way. If you're a man, you must behave that way. And both have their strengths and weaknesses. But I think we need to be looking at more from the lens of sex, right? Our physiology of how do our systems function differently so that we can create environments that sustain both of those systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this is such an important part of this conversation. So for listeners, Rachel, who don't fully understand the four phases of the menstrual cycle, can you
Yeah.
break down how each one affects energy, stress tolerance, and emotional resilience in real leadership environments?
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk. We'll talk about the four stages. So our first stage is going to be our follicular stage. This is after the bleeding has ended, and this leads up to the ovulatory phase, which is when we release the egg. Then we move into our luteal phase. So this is estrogen is rising through those first two follicular and ovulation, and then it drops, and we see an increase in progesterone as we move into the luteal phase, and then we have bleeding. And so when we look at this through the lens of our nervous system and what it's capable of is
Mm.
during well, have you heard of the window of tolerance?
I do have, maybe I may have just a subtle, kind of info about it, but yeah, if you can, uh,
Yeah.
shine some.
But I thought highlight that a little bit because this impacts the emotional response and energy and everything.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
Lead research.
yeah, so our window of tolerance changes across our cycle. And what the window of
Mhm.
tolerance is when you're inside of the window of tolerance, and this was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel for anyone who wants to look it up. When you're inside of this is when you have the ability to handle stress without dysregulation. This is where you're able to adapt
Mm.
to different things that are
Mhm.
happening, the ebbs and flows of your given day. So, this is where you feel more joy, curiosity, open mindedness, presence, groundedness, and you can be responsive. When you jump out of your window of tolerance, this is where things change. So, if we go up above the window of tolerance, we move into fight or flight mode. And then for women, there's also kind of a theoretical framework around it's tend or befriend because women produce more oxytocin when they're in in this state. And so they go into
Mm.
people pleasing mode. So, right, this shows up a lot in leadership, people pleasing mode, not setting boundaries, also like putting others' needs in front of your own. Whereas the
Mm.
traditional fight or flight is like, right, fleeing from something or fighting to achieve something. And so we see both of this, but at a nervous system level, the same thing is happening is it's stressing the nervous system. And so it increases our allostatic load, so the general wear and tear on the body. And we may experience things
Mhm.
like anxiety or a lot of thoughts, binary, kind of black and white thinking. And this is a state that can be great to get things done, right? Like, say you've got an urgent deadline, this is where it can help you. We can't sustain this though. We want to go back into into the window of tolerance or what I call connection state. And then when we drop below the window of tolerance, we move into freeze or shutdown. So this is essentially when the nervous system is saying, there's nothing I can do to save myself. I'm going to play dead. Like that's the simplest way to put it. And so this is where we feel withdrawn. You know it? Yes. Yeah. And yeah, we all know it. Yeah, right? So it's like we withdraw, we feel like boggy, we feel numb. What's that?
Totally. Like, I do not want to get off my bed. I just want to sleep all the day and, have cravings. And then sometimes I also like having, those future kind of, those kind of, thoughts, anxiety. Everything is going to get destroyed if I please don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm hearing too is like your nervous system's swinging between the fight or flight and the freeze or shutdown, or you have a little bit of both. And so going back to the menstrual cycle and how this impacts this is the window of tolerance, it changes across the month. So during the first two, the ovulation phases, we have a wider window, which means we have greater resilience. Our nervous system is able to shift across those three states more easily and to come back into that connection, that regulation state more easily. After we after we ovulate and we move into the luteal phase and the bleeding phase, the window of tolerance
Mhm.
narrows and we have heightened reactivity. And so this is why we might feel overwhelmed. This is why we might feel emotional, right? So maybe you're in a meeting that's a high tension meeting. And in the first half of your cycle, you feel like you can navigate it really, really well. But in the second phase, you might really be struggling and you're feeling really reactive. And that's because at this point in time, your nervous system doesn't have the ability to shift states as easily as it does. There are tools we can use to help increase that window of tolerance, the baseline window of tolerance, which helps. But there's also the understanding of it's not going to be the same for me every day. It's actually going to shift.
Mm. Rachel, I have a question from here. Sometimes, especially this reactivity aspect here. Um, uh, I mean, sometimes there could be very simple situations, and this is not just with respect to workplaces, but in personal day-to-day interaction as well. That especially during the heightened reactivity phase, we may kind of, sometimes I would tend to um say something very, as common as, I'll get it done. Don't worry, I'll get it done. Maybe in a tone that is a kind of like, I'm getting like irritated. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can get misread or misunderstood. So
Mm.
do you think that the um entire kind of, burden of this awareness lies on us, or this can be kind of mitigated and, across sexes or genders?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I definitely think it can be mitigated. And it really starts with education, right? Educating our workplaces of how this can happen. And cultivating cultures where you have that sense of support, collaboration, and assuming best intentions, right? So if for some reason, like you notice your tone shifts, which it can, right? I think there's the one piece of as the person experiencing this, like I need to take ownership of the fact I'm in a reactive state. Is there anything I can do in real time to help regulate my voice? Right. So knowing like what are the specific breath work is actually great for regulating the nervous system very quickly. So it's like, could I do that live? But then the other side I see is like if the team or the company better understands that we go through this, that a team member can say, "Hey, I'm noticing maybe there's a little bit of frustration or annoyance in your voice. I just want to check in and see what's going on." And it opens up dialogue. And so you can say, "Oh, I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now." Um, that wasn't my intention, and you can clarify and move forward. And so I see these moments, right? These moments of repair is really important when you think about it through the lens of like building healthy workplaces and cultures. So it can definitely be mitigated, but I think part of it is like, what is the ownership I have as the individual experiencing it? But how can we also create an environment that understands my experience as well?
Exactly. That makes
Yeah.
absolute sense.
Yeah.
And I also believe that, this is such a huge kind of, superpower because you have coached professionals across 41 nationalities. So what differences do you see in the way women's nervous systems respond to stress? Like, is it dictated by the cultures as well, um, or like is it different like between men and women? Who those who understand and those who don't understand the cycle.
Yeah. So there's definitely variance, but I have seen themes across cultures, across genders, and sexes, right? And
Mm.
so I do think, when I'm working with an individual, it's helping them understand more the physiology because physiology, genetically we do see genetic differences across the
Mm.
world. But it's also understanding, like, what is the general functioning of the physiology, and also one thing that's really important when you think about nervous system mastery is there's not one size fits all. What may work for you may not work for me, even though we're both women and we're both females. So I do think when I'm working across just the diverse types of people I have, one, I see a majority are dysregulated most of the time. I work mainly with folks in tech and startups. They're in environments that I like to say are one giant dysregulated nervous system. And
Yeah.
because of how we co-regulate and co-dysregulate as human beings, like we are in environments where we're regularly dysregulated at a nervous system level. And so I really see there's, like, a lot of similarities, but how it manifests looks a little bit differently. But when we go down to the root cause, it tends to be the same or very similar.
Hmm. No, no, I totally agree with you. And I think, as you mentioned about startups and remote companies also, remote first or high pressure startups,
Mm.
especially, I think this is something that, not many discussions are around here, like cycle aware leadership. How does it actually look like in practice? Not the idealistic version, but the real version.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's kind of the 2 pieces. One is, like, how do I schedule my workday? The other is how do I manage my nervous system? And
Mhm.
so when we think of my workday, and, one thing I'll say is there's never, there's that idealistic version of what we want to do, but
Mm.
really that's not the reality because we have a lot of different people depending on us in leadership roles. But when we're
Mm.
thinking about our follicular phase, this is where we've got that excess energy. We can take on more challenges. We can do different projects. We can be working on different things. And when we move into ovulation, this tends to be our most magnetic period. So like presenting, speaking, we can really show up quite strongly there. And then as we move into luteal, this is where we need to slow down a bit. And so this is great for like finishing up projects. This is great for kind of those like admin type tasks that you want to finish. And then moving into the bleeding phase is more of how can I slow down, go inward, reflect. So maybe there are different things you want to start thinking through for that next cycle that can prepare you so you can really move into action. And so from a leadership lens or from like just a professional lens, it's how can I start to do more of those things in my day and kind of shift my planning. So I worked in mainly remote for the last 7 or 8 years, and maybe more. I started in 2017. So I've been working remotely since 2017. And what I noticed is as I was shifting my schedules to align with my different phases, one, no one noticed. No one noticed. And two, I felt so much better. And I was like, oh, this is easy. How did I not do this before?
Yeah.
Right. You'll still have meetings though. So even if you're in the luteal phase and you feel tired, this is where that nervous system piece comes in of what can I do to help support myself? How can I have gentler practices? So like non-sleep deep rest. How can I practice more compassion? How can I have lower demands so that I am supporting my system at that physiological level? So I think part of that's really important. And I can talk through specific tools you can use for each, like the first half versus the second half, if that'd be helpful. But I'll just pause here since I already shared a lot around what we could do.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Rachel, because that exactly is going to be my next and the concluding question here. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when we think about like the follicular and ovulation phases, this is when we've got that higher capacity. We'll want to do more vigorous breath work. So you could do like Ujjayi breath or breath of
Yeah.
fire, box breathing with longer holds. This is where you can move into more dynamic movement practices. So more cardio, hit, lifting weights. Cold exposure can be good here. We can do cold exposure throughout our whole cycle. There's some research coming out showing that it does not work the same for female physiology as men, and it can actually stress the system more. Um, and so you really use these to leverage your wider window of tolerance. Once we move into that second half, into the luteal phase specifically,
Mm,
also known as the luteal vulnerability window, this is when we have that lower
mm,
capacity. We want to do slower, longer exhales. So this is where diaphragmatic breathing can be really, really helpful. Also, the physiological breath we can use here. This helps disrupt the nervous system as we move into a reactive state. It's one of the most effective, and it takes 30 seconds. So you can literally do this in a meeting if you need to. Then we move into things like exactly. And the whole idea behind the practices that I teach in nervous system mastery for women is how can we do well, how can we spend less time, right? Because traditionally, mindfulness, it's like sit and meditate for 30 minutes. Well, who has 30 minutes if they're really busy, if they're a leader, if they have a high demand workplace, if they have a partner and a family, right? Like all of those things. That's how can we really um right be work smarter rather than harder, right? Like kind of cliche, but how can we do that? So 30 seconds, that can help you. The other things we can do during the luteal vulnerability window is humming, singing, or voo sounds. So when the vocal cords vibrate, this triggers vagal stimulation, and this is what helps bring us back into that window of tolerance. We can do things like gentle rocking or swaying. You can do some self massage on the neck, the chest, the belly. There are different pressure receptors that you can tap into. Here is where you do warm compresses rather than cold. So this temperature can signal safety to the body. And then you can do things like weighted blankets or gentle pressure. And then in the last phase, the fourth, the menstrual or bleeding phase, right? Restorative yoga poses. So the right where you have your legs up the wall is a great one. Just doing gentle movement, extended holds and stretching, warm baths, just really minimal demands on your system because it's already doing a lot of work since it's hit that kind of like culmination piece in terms of the physiological cycle for the month.
mm. I mean, this is fascinating. And why it is fascinating, Rachel? Because these are all, doable. It's not that, as you mentioned, 30 minutes or 90-minute kind of a ritual, because that itself can sometimes, really, get us into that loop of, how can I figure out to extract more and more time so that I get to relax. So I think these are some very, very doable ways to begin with. And to Rachel, to get more and more to explore more about this, if our listeners they would like to connect with you, what would be the easiest way?
Yeah, I mean, they can just go to my website, rachelkorb.com, and they can learn more about what I do. So I do coaching, but I'm also launching a program this coming year on nervous system mastery for women because I've decided why not expand and share this with more people because it's not talked about enough yet. And I think it's something that can really, where I've seen it one on one with my clients, but I'd really love to see it more in the mainstream of people talking about this and having the tools that they've needed and haven't had historically.
Beautiful, beautiful. So listeners, what I'm gonna do is have all these videos in the show notes for all of you to connect with Rachel. And I think Rachel, first of all, I should really, really thank you because today you didn't just explain the 28-day rhythm, you gave language to experiences, so many women have silently carried. So thank you so much. This is really, really much needed and enlightening.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, for anyone listening, if there are any questions come up, let me know. I love talking about this and I think it's really, really important because it can change everything for how like can change everything in terms of how you feel, but also how you experience the world.
Exactly, exactly. Couldn't agree more with you. And to everyone listening, this conversation isn't about making life easier, but it is about making life truer. So, as we head into the holiday stretch and things would get chaotic, maybe this is your invitation to pause, to track one thing, to listen to a little deeper, and to stop fighting your biology and start collaborating with it. So, to all the listeners, thank you so much. I invite all of you to stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay in conversation with your own body. Until then, this is your host, Sana, and this has been the Mindful Journey. Thank you.